Hi everyone, I'm Hilary Walton and it's a pleasure to be here today. Today I'm going to talk to you about why your people are not as secure as you think. So let's get started. I'm just going to share my screen for you and we'll get into this. Okay, so I'm Hilary Walton and first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I like to start these presentations by sort of telling you about the fact I'm actually many things. So I'll start with that. Okay, so first of all, I'm a wife and a mother of three. I'm also an organizational psychologist, a risk management practitioner, a digital transformation leader. I'm a security culture expert and we'll be focusing on that sort of area today. But I also am a YouTube and podcast producer, and I'm also the Chief Information Security Officer at the Kordia Group. So the Kordia Group is a business across Australia and New Zealand. Our pedigree is secure and robust mission critical networks, and we've got a really diverse portfolio of mission critical networks we actually look after. So we do business to business telecommunications. We have a media arm who transmit TV and radio, so another mission critical network. We do maritime emergency, cloud connectivity and migrations, and we have a really large cybersecurity arm spread across Kordia, as well as Aura Information Security, which is one of our consultancies. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in the business. And that has been really helpful in current times, particularly with the pandemic environment, because economically things have been a little bit more changeable. But from a security perspective, my role is looking after the security of the business. So that diverse portfolio means I actually have a lot of security risks that I need to manage on a day-to-day basis. So in the media in 2020 and so far in 2021, we've heard about many cyber attacks disrupting businesses. Of note, some sort of high-profile ones across the Australia and New Zealand patch were the DDoS attacks on the New Zealand Stock Exchange in August 2020. And then just last week, a cyber attack on Channel 9 over in Australia. And so that's just to name a couple. So at Kordia, we do this annual survey of IT decision makers. And we look at their perceptions of cybersecurity within their business. And we call it our Cybersecurity Market Research Report. So while these results are a bit New Zealand centric, what they do is they echo the results that other countries have found. And I know this according to the security trust groups that I'm a part of. So what we found was almost a third of Kiwi businesses say they've had an increase in cyber attacks during the lockdown last year. And more than 40% were targeted by COVID-19 themes attacked. And despite the rise in ransomware and DDoS attacks, almost a third of businesses didn't review their security post-lockdown. So the COVID pandemic had some really far-reaching impacts on the security landscape. For example, people changed their work habits. As the country entered lockdown, businesses moved rapidly from being office-based to highly distributed and remote workforces. And these urgently implemented changes, coupled with high interest of activity in response to COVID-19, have really increased the potential impact of a security breach. Another impact was the rapid introduction of tools to support remote working, so things like video conferencing, as well as unmanaged devices such as laptops, tablets, mobile phones. And this is all likely to have altered the business exposure and attack surface. And while the risk appetite for rapid introduction of these tools really kind of increased because people had to necessitate operating, many organizations now need to go back and review these tools to evaluate them and make sure that they cover off the risk to their organization through the deployment. But what we're seeing is a third of businesses really haven't done this security review. In addition, information security measures such as regular patching and user account audits and security figurations and device hardening, all of this may have been not have been effectively implemented during the pandemic as well. So what we're seeing is, it's highly likely to result in businesses being more susceptible to the types of attack techniques and procedures used by threat actors. So this is why cybersecurity has kind of hit the news a lot in the media recently. And in addition to this, what we see is that our survey went on to find that more than half of New Zealand businesses were successfully targeted by ransomware attacks over the last 12 months. And 20% of these attacks cause really serious disruption to their businesses. And over 65% of businesses said they would actually pay to regain stolen access to their data. So they just want to get on and get operational again. And a really interesting result, this last one, 1 in 10 said they'll be willing to pay up to 50 grand to get their data back. So this is really significant, as it shows that the act of businesses actually paying ransoms makes the matters worse. So if cyber criminals know that they will get a result, they'll get the payout they're looking for, then they continue that criminal activity. And this has also probably been compounded by cyber insurances effectively covering the ransoms on behalf of businesses. So in terms of preparedness, here are 5 things that you should be thinking about and putting in place. So firstly, in relation to the question, we need to remember that IT security doesn't actually just belong to IT. It must encompass processes, procedures, and even things like culture, which we'll talk about a lot in this presentation. It belongs to business owners and your people, and it's fully and squarely a business risk, not an IT issue, even though it might be called IT security. And as a director myself, as well as a security practitioner, I want to give you some tips in terms of the areas that I think you need to focus on. So the first is, what are your business's most important assets and how are they protected? Because if you know what items your business cannot operate without, and if you know where your assets are and how they are protected, you can make good governance decisions about security investment. Number 2, how do you ensure that your business is equipped to address and manage security risks? So I would want some assurance that the security risk management processes are done really robustly, and that the business is regularly looking at and reassessing the risk posture as it changes, and that vulnerabilities are being managed appropriately as soon as they are known. And that's a key one there. Number 3, are you satisfied that the business has appropriate and rehearsed crisis management plans and business continuity plans to respond to the company if the company experiences a security incident? Now, look, I know what you might be thinking. Look, we've practiced our crisis management plans. We've been through the pandemic, but you need to practice them in relation to security incidents as well. So they need to be regularly tested so that your company can have confidence that they will work, and to ensure that your people and management are familiar with them if called upon. Number 4 is around visibility and monitoring of your networks. What visibility and monitoring do you have in place to spot any malicious or unusual activity? Because the quicker you know about a compromise or incident, the sooner you can recover and the better you'll recover. And the last one is, what is your security culture like in the business? Are there areas of the business that you need to strengthen? So security culture is an organization's style and approach to security. And it's about how much of a security mindset a business has. And if you have a good security culture, you'll have greatly improved security performance. Because failure to improve security culture and really give it that attention it deserves can lead to things like loss of IP, intellectual property, compromised systems, damage to brand and reputation of the CEO and the board members, major incidents that can threaten the survival of your business, or even just minor incidents that can be really expensive and time-consuming to resolve. So DDoS is an attack method that re-emerged in 2020, and it took down some really large, high-profile organizations. But what else should you be worried about? What are the other likely attack methods for 2021? Well, the attack methods don't really change that fast, although they can get more sophisticated. And the best example of that is DDoS, so distributed denial of service. That one has actually been around for years. But for 2021, I believe what we will see is the continued prevalence of data breaches, perhaps even more awareness of these are the serious ones, which require legislatively to be reported to privacy commissioners in countries where that applies. The reason that I say this is that COVID-19 pushed many organisations online remote, and there's likely to be impacts and fallout of this as organisations catch up with some of the actions they've taken. That the world took a giant leap forward from a digital transformation perspective, and businesses went digital, which has increased the attack surface for cyber criminals to play with. More people went on the internet, and that means more connections, so more damage that can be done by cyber criminals. And I think we're going to find the security impacts for small to medium enterprises in particular, who have embraced digital, and who may also not fully have all the security controls required. So the ramifications for these businesses can be more cybersecurity events. Because organizations with poor security are more likely to become victim of malicious cyber activity. And it's much less likely to detect such activity before it actually causes harm. And if you think about it, compare it with your own behavior over the pandemic as well. So we all downloaded many more apps for our personal use than we ever did before. And what that means is more personal information available on the internet to be exploited. The second attack method we'll see more of, in my prediction, is the exploitation of known vulnerabilities. And we've already seen some major ones with the SolarWinds attack and also the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, which were all this year. So a vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by a malicious actor to perform unauthorized actions on a system. And vulnerabilities might exist in software, hardware, physical environments, even organizational processes, personnel, or combinations thereof. And the vulnerability advisories that come out from the technology vendors, they're really hard to keep up with, and they come in from lots of different sources. And not all organizations have good vulnerability scanning or vulnerability management processes in place. I think we're also going to see more ransomware incidents, and they're most likely to be the targeted type, where the criminals have actually done their research on you, because we're seeing much more of this with the sophisticated groups that are doing cyber attacks. And we'll also continue to see malicious cyber actors modifying their tactics to really exploit the current events and crises for their own financial benefit, which could be to steal user credentials, to deliver malware, or defraud individuals and organizations. And the hot one here is the COVID vaccine that cyber criminals are jumping on the bandwagon of to extort money from people using that particular theme. And there's more of a move towards governments suggesting the introduction of specific cybersecurity duties for company directors, just like we've seen with health and safety. So the example I've got up on the screen is the Australian government's cybersecurity strategy for 2020, which put forward this suggestion. And what Australia does, well, over here in New Zealand, we do tend to follow. So this could be on the horizon for organisations in New Zealand. But if you think about it, security is a business risk, and more senior leaders that I speak to are seeing it as the business risk that will take down their organizations. It used to be health and safety, but we know a lot more about that now, and we're generally more mature in our approach. And I believe we're still fairly immature when it comes to security. And the role of company directors is about the long-term sustainability of a company. So security is and should be a consideration for directors, irrespective of legislative changes that governments might put in place. In New Zealand, the Privacy Commissioner has been given the ability, as of the 1st of December 2020, to impose fines for offending businesses. And this is similar to legislation that's been in effect in Australia for a couple of years now, and some other countries. So if you're doing business in Australia and New Zealand, then you need to be aware of the corresponding legislation. I do think legislation like this will better protect citizen data, and I think it is a step in the right direction. However, what I've got up on the screen is some results from our survey, which found 45% of New Zealand businesses were completely unaware of the Privacy Act changes that came in late last year and what it means for them. The number of businesses that have cybersecurity policies and training in place to prevent breaches is also decreasing, and 36% of businesses were subject to a cyber attack in the past 12 months. So this is a real worry, and it echoes my point that businesses are still on the security and privacy journey. In relation to privacy, businesses should ensure that your data breach response plans include the impact of privacy breaches and any additional processes that need to be followed to align with legislation in relevant countries. Check your people have been trained in privacy practices and processes as well. Check your processes to also collect, store, use, and disclose personal information and align it to privacy legislation where appropriate. And don't forget your suppliers and other third parties. You need to update their contracts with particularly those who process personal information for you. One of the areas I'm really passionate about is security culture. And so that's where I want to spend the bulk of this conversation. So now I'd like to talk to you about what that is and how you can develop it in your business. So every business has a unique internal culture that affects how it operates, in the same way a family has a culture that affects how it operates. For example, consider the royal family in the UK. Many of the issues that family has is because of this clash of cultures between the traditional royal family and how it's supposed to behave and operate, and the cultural differences that have emerged when Meghan and Harry married and started changing the way things were done. So culture is how things are done around here, and it shapes how people think, make decisions, and ultimately behave. So security culture is about how an organization or individual behaves in terms of its style or approach to security. But why is this important? Well, human factors or people were involved in 99% of compromise attempts in 2019, according to Proofpoint. And 70 to 90% of malicious breaches reported since 2005 by KnowBe4 also related to human factors or people. And in our survey, we make the statement that technology and processes alone won't hold back cyber criminals. Your employees definitely are your first line of defense against cyber attacks, but 2 in 5 organizations don't have policies and training in place to help prevent cyber breaches. And this is a result we've seen decrease over the past few years. So while security might be seen as more important in organizations, the policies and training to prevent them are decreasing. And only a half of those are confident that employees understand the importance of good password practice, which is one of the basic security practices. So in addition, we found while 62% of businesses say they carry out security training exercises with their staff, only 37% say they have actually received training on good cybersecurity practices. Also, 1/3 of employees admit to using the same password across work and personal devices and accounts. And almost 1/3 of people don't update their work computer or smartphone as soon as the software updates become available. 20% of people only sometimes check links to ensure they're legitimate. And 17% of respondents say they're not actually that confident they could tell the difference between a legitimate and a fake email. So the title of this presentation being around "Your people are not as secure as you think" suggests that we need to ensure that the security information being reported up actually reflects cybersecurity reality within the organization. Because what we're seeing is, as IT and security professionals, we think we do a good job in training our staff and putting the right messages out there, but it's not translating into security behaviors in the organization in the way that we think it is. So good security awareness is constant reminders and check-ins, not just once-off training. And we need to consider how security messages are being translated into behaviors in the business, because that's. Are there any chances for employees to not just hear about cybersecurity, but actually do? For example, the use of gamification in security training is really useful for that. And also providing workshops for employees as well, so that they can actually, for example, learn how to set up a password manager and have someone help step them through it. Need to make sure that the different channels used to deliver security messages and training are actually appropriate. So with the switch to digital transformation, there became a lot more communication channels that organizations have and they can use. For example, there are chat lines, there are groups, there might be video conferencing, as well as the traditional internet. So what are the ones that's where the attention of staff is, and are you making sure that you're putting your messages out on all of those channels so that people actually get the message? Has the organisation used a security culture questionnaire to understand the perceptions of employees to security? This is a key one as well, which I'll come back to. And what's the frequency and clarity of security communications across the organisation? So my personal passion for security culture started when I was in London, and I managed to get a job with MI5 in their behavioural science unit, which was located in the Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure, or CPNI. So CPNI was their forward-facing unit. So the security culture of MI5 when I was there was extremely strong, as you can imagine. For example, we were taught from day one to be paranoid about who was watching us simply go to work. At the door of our offices, we would blank people until we were safely inside the doors and out of sight. So blanking someone means you would pretend not to know them, and you wouldn't acknowledge them, you wouldn't say hello, and it made sense because there was a chance someone was watching you and your safety, as well as the safety of others, could be in jeopardy. Inside the office, your peers would help manage your security behaviours in a really active way. If you, for example, left your computer unlocked when you walked away from it, or left any papers on your desk when you went home, or didn't collect your printing from the printer straight away, your colleague, and this is any colleague, no matter what their level or seniority, will give you some coaching, a teaching moment. And if you did it again, it would get more serious. And if you were a repeat offender, well, you were likely to be asked not to come back to work. It was pretty extreme, I know, and I'm not saying this is the right approach for all organisations to security, but the point is it was right for the context of the organisation. So culture pervades every part of a business and it impacts many things, including security. But you know what? Security, it's not one of those really exciting books like 50 Shades of Grey. They don't call it 50 Shades of Security, and it can be less interesting for people who aren't as passionate about me, and boring to some people as well, or seen as a blocker if it's putting barriers in place and can make it harder for people to do their job, particularly if it's locked down too tight and if people feel they can't move. So how tightly you need to lock down your security is going to be a factor of the context of your business operates in, and it should be appropriate to that. Okay, but how do you get that right? To change a person or an organization's security culture and behaviors, you have to understand it's more than just awareness alone. For example, I think it's fair to say that everyone is 100% aware that smoking will kill you, but people still smoke. And it's because they're not motivated enough or they don't have the capability right now to quit. And security culture and getting people to do the right thing in relation to security is the same. Take the use of password managers again. Look, I expect you know lots of people who don't use a password manager, even now. So a password manager, if you're not sure what that is, it's a secure vault to put your passwords in. And this is the passwords to the many accounts you have. Generally, we tend to talk about people having 30 to 50 accounts. So if you don't use a password manager, then you're probably doing one of two things. One, you're writing down all your passwords somewhere, probably on your phone or computer or even in a notepad. Or, and this is the more likely one, you're reusing 2 to 4 passwords over different accounts. You know, you have your reasonably strong one, which we're using for your internet banking and your serious accounts. And then you have your slightly weaker ones for your social media accounts, or perhaps, and then perhaps a different one you're using for online shopping platforms, for example. So one of the keys here to actually change a person's behaviour is to look at the whole culture management process. So I'm going to go through that for you now. So when I'm building my security program, my security strategy, I use this culture change model as the key to getting the security behaviours I need. So culture, if you start at the top, is the organisation's values and beliefs, and it's embedded into the next circle down, which is individual attitudes and opinions of your people. And this influences their behaviour. So when you're wanting to shape culture, there are 6 mechanisms or levers you can use. And you'll note that it's more than just comms and an awareness program. You need to think of this as a whole system. So the first one is you need to get management to buy in and commit to security, to really believe in it. And a good way to do this is to get a security maturity assessment done. So this looks at the performance of your security management system and lets you know the parts that are working well versus the bits where you could use, plugging the gaps or develop further. And this might just be the burning platform that you need. This can be done in a self-assessment kind of way, or often it's quite good to get an external organization to come in and do this because it does provide that more independent approach and they're comparing to what they've seen in other organizations. Number 2, you need to have ways to incentivize and motivate staff. So what kind of carrots and sticks do you have for good and bad security behaviors? And remember, the good ones are really important to encourage as well. So is there some way that you can have some kind of reward or award system where you're actually recognizing those good security behaviors and celebrating them? Number 3, you need to consider how the business manages pressures like stress, fatigue, delivery pressures to ensure your people don't cut corners. For example, can people speak up to stop a project if it's not secure? It's that kind of thing. Number 4, you need to have security embedded in the organizational systems and processes. So think outside of security to the systems and processes that you can get security into. So make sure security is part of the induction process, try and weave it into performance management, and think of those other systems and processes that might already be there that you can jump into. For example, if you have a third-party management system, and as part of that, you're going out to your third parties and talking to them about maybe the performance of what they're doing for you, can you inject security into that as well so that security can be part of that conversation? Because when you bring a vendor on, they might have a certain security posture, but that can change over time if you don't look after your vendors in an ongoing way. Number 5 is you need to have the comms in place. And this is all the usual stuff you'd think of. So, your security intranet sites, you might have some kind of monthly bulletins or emails that go out to staff. You might have posters. You might have videos that you do. You might, inject security messages into town hall meetings or management meetings as they come up. You need to be doing all that usual stuff when it comes to security. And lastly, one of the last levers you have is to really consider how you're going to develop compliance and ownership of security in people, because security belongs to everyone and it's everyone's responsibility. And so here, monitoring might come into play as well as assurance processes. So these are the 6 levers that you can use to manage the security culture within your organization. Now, depending on which lever you think is strong enough, you might prioritize one over the other. So for example, if you're on the start of this journey, then management commitment is where you need to start. So put a lot of effort into making sure that particular lever has a good foothold before you look at the others. And then you can expand out to look at the others and put those kind of mechanisms in place to really shift the dial on your security culture. Right, so there you have it. Some of the up-to-date research that illustrates that your people just aren't as secure as you think, and some tips and a model you can use to drive the right security culture and behaviours. So what I might do now is just have a little look in the questions in case we have any coming through there. And feel free to put some questions there in the minutes that we have left. If you have any burning questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, look, this is a subject that's really dear to my heart. As a organizational psychologist and a chief information security officer, I think this is one of the areas in organizations that we definitely need to put more focus into. So if you want to connect with me, then here are my contact details, and I'm also on all the usual social platforms as @Hilary Walton, or you can look out for my Digital Culture Ideas YouTube channel and podcasts in case you'd like to connect with me there. Okay, well, as there's no other questions coming through, I'll finish up there. I hope you enjoyed the talk. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and enjoy the rest of your day.